My name is Randell McShepard, and I am the chairman and co-founder of PolicyBridge and will serve as the moderator for tonight's program. For those of you that do not know, PolicyBridge is a public policy think tank that has been hosting forums such as this, as well as writing research reports since the year 2005. Our focus is to analyze how public policy affects communities of color. The subject at hand tonight is, why did Harriet Tubman go back? We all know that Ms. Tubman led many missions that transitioned slaves to freedom, traveling by foot, by boat, by wagon, and by any other necessary means. We also know that she first went back to free relatives and then continued to go back to help slaves that she did not know. In spite of a $40,000 reward for her capture and the need to expand her Underground Railroad further north to Canada, Harriet kept going back. It does beg the question, what inspired her to continue to put her life in danger time and time again? What could be learned today about her courageous and selfless acts of leadership and sacrifice? We have an esteemed panel of community leaders to help us examine these questions this evening. And I'd like to take a few minutes just to introduce them to each and every one of you. As I call your name, please wave to the crowd, ladies and gentlemen. First, I'd like to introduce Gerald Ford. Gerald A. Ford works for the Lutheran Metropolitan Ministry, serving in dual capacities as the Director of Employment Services and the Director of the Youth Employment Program. He previously served as the Housing Program Manager for University Settlement's Family Homeless Prevention Program. He's worked as the Project Coordinator for Towards Employment's Urban Youth Works Contract and Program Coordinator for the City of East Cleveland's Park and Recreations Department. Mr. Ford is a 2010 graduate of the Cleveland Bridge Builders Program and a 2005 Case Western Reserve Troy Mart Youth Development Fellow. The highlight of his career arose in 2008 when he was selected to train youth development professionals in Israel on the subject of youth resiliency. Gerald serves on several local and national boards, including Cornucopia Incorporated and the National Association of Workforce Development Professionals. He currently sits on the board of the Urban League and serves as the president of the Urban League of Greater Cleveland Young Professionals. And finally, Gerald's favorite quote is, I like this, very deep, "We must no longer give credit to those who predict the rain, but rather give credit to those who supply the umbrellas." Next, I bring to you Reverend Dr. Todd C. Davidson. Reverend Dr. Todd C. Davidson is the recently appointed senior pastor of the historic Antioch Baptist Church in Cleveland, Ohio. He and his family are settled in Cleveland and excited about their new opportunity. I love this about his bio. It doesn't just say he is married, but it says he is excitedly married to Leah Elizabeth. Give him a round of applause for that. That's right. I'm going to have to borrow that one, Reverend. But he and his lovely wife also have 3 beautiful daughters. He holds a Bachelor's of Arts degree in Government and Elementary Education from the College of William and Mary, a Master of Divinity degree in Theology from the Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology at Virginia Union, and earned a doctoral degree in Educational Policy, Planning, and Leadership at the College of William and Mary. Pastor Davidson was licensed to preach in 1997 and ordained in 1998 by the Old Dominion General Baptist Association. Previous to his current post at Antioch, he was a senior pastor of the Big Piney Grove Baptist Church in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Prior to that, he was employed with the Norfolk Public School System as a teacher and later was elected to the Virginia Beach Public School Board, making him the youngest person to win an election in the history of the city of Virginia Beach. Dr. Davidson has received numerous awards, including the Virginia Beach Human Rights Commission Award and the Urban League of Hampton Roads Young Professional of the Year Award. He enjoys spending his time with his family and serving God's people. His favorite scripture is Philippians 4:13, which states, "For I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." Next, Gregory L. Brown. Gregory L. Brown is the Executive Director of PolicyBridge, a nonpartisan public policy think tank based in Cleveland, Ohio. He has held that position since the year 2009. Prior to that, he was president of Brown and Associates Consulting Services, which provided consulting services to philanthropic, public, and nonprofit organizations in areas including strategic planning, youth development, and public policy. Mr. Brown also served as executive director and president of the Center for Community Solutions. Under his leadership, Community Solutions strategically sparked and promoted an understanding of the critical link between human services and economic development. Mr. Brown has also served as assistant director of the Cleveland Community Building Initiative, executive director of the Fairfax Renaissance Development Corporation, and housing management director for CMHA. He has held numerous board positions and currently serves on the boards of Beachbrook, Global Cleveland, Northeast Ohio Sustainable Communities Consortium, and the Centers for Families and Children. Greg holds a bachelor's degree in political science and a master's degree in urban affairs from Cleveland State University, where he is a distinguished alum as well as an adjunct professor. And last but certainly not least, I'd like to thank Dr. Rhonda Y. Williams for providing the rose amongst us thorns. Thank you, Dr. Williams. Dr. Rhonda Y. Williams is a tenured associate professor of history at the College of Arts and Sciences at Case Western Reserve University and serves as program faculty for the Ethnic Studies and Women's Studies programs. Dr. Williams founded and directs Case's postdoctoral fellowship in African American Studies. She also founded and was appointed director of the Case Western Reserve University Social Justice Institute by the university's president, Barbara Snyder. Dr. Williams also chaired the university's search for their inaugural Vice President for Inclusion, Diversity, and Equal Opportunity. Dr. Williams earned her BS degree in journalism from the University of Maryland, College Park, where she graduated summa cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa, and became the university's first black student to receive its highest honors of salutatorian and commencement speaker in the university's 187-year history. That's right. Give her a round of applause. This caught the eye of organizations and media outlets like Jet Magazine and Washington Post, among others. After a few years of experience as a newspaper reporter, she left journalism to pursue her PhD in history from the University of Pennsylvania, which she earned under the guidance of Dr. Mary Frances Berry. Now I know where your spunk comes from. For those of you that don't know, Dr. Mary Frances Berry is the former chairwoman of the United States Commission on Civil Rights. Dr. Williams received tenure in 2004, becoming the first African American to achieve this professional standing in the history department at Case Western Reserve University. She is well published. She serves on the editorial board of several scholarly journals and is a highly sought after speaker. And I couldn't find it in her bio, but she's also on the board of PolicyBridge. I just wanted to share that. So let's give all of our panelists a rousing round of applause. So, on with the show. I will ask questions and dialogue personally with the panel, and when it gets good to all of you, we'll open it up and continue the discussion with the audience. So, the first question I would ask, and I will maybe throw this one to the panel and let anyone answer first that might care to. But in your own words, why do you think Harriet Tubman went back once she was free? Was it anger? Was it just a stubborn spirit? Was it her fearlessness? Was it her faith? Or was it something altogether different? Who would like to answer that first?
Oh, so I'm the woman on the panel. I get
ladies first is what my grandmother always said to me.
See how they do you? Well, I think it was a little bit of all of it. And I would say her anger at the systems that were in place in terms of enslavement, in terms of the mistreatment, degradation, and horrific, one could say, incarceration is our current word for it, but really life and limb and control of people wholesale as chattel. And the way that she was treated in a very brutal manner and the kind of brutality that she saw around her every day. I can only say that would provoke anger. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, righteous indignation is something that can spur all of us, I think, and that we should honor and hold on to and transform into some kind of positive moment for actual action. So I would say anger is one of them. And I would say if we're going to say stubborn spirit, we should say that it's connected to determination, right? And that there's a commitment and a motivation that she showed to go back day in and day out, planned, organized, with a network of people to really not just get her family out, her family, her brother, her parents, but also to get people out that she did not have one-on-one contact with, right? It took commitment and determination to do that. And I would say also, fearlessness, she could not have been not afraid. So I think, and this is one of the places where I say we honor that spirit that makes us do the things and encourages us to do the things that really could have bodily harm, right? Because this is what we're talking about, bodily harm, death to Harriet Tubman. But fear, and to honor fear that we work through, also shows a sign of courage. And I think that's really important to say with the young people in the room, and I applaud the fact that there are young people in the room, that all of us have fear. The question is, how do you navigate that fear? Right? How do you manage that fear, and how do you work beyond that fear? And so I think Harriet Tubman was motivated by all of that in her day, where enslavement was the law of the land, and where people were property, and they were treated that way. No better sometimes than animals, almost sometimes like wagons, beaten and brutalized. So that's how I would start. So.
Well, thank you very much. Reverend Davidson, I see you nodding.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly with Dr. Williams. And in addition to that, I would add, I think that she had a unique sense of moral purpose in being driven to go back. She never allowed where she was to affect who she was, because she always understood that whose she was bigger than where she was. Howard Thurman, the great theologian, said that what you're in cannot poison you unless you allow it to get in you. And she never allowed slavery to become a part of her ideology. She never, even though she was bound, she never decorated herself. Charles Dutton, who starred in the sitcom Rock, which was big when I was growing up. Some of the young folks may not be aware of that. But Charles Dutton went from jail to Yale. And he was asked, how did you go from jail to graduate from Yale University? And he said, the one thing I did when I was in jail was I never decorated myself. I never set up shop there, because I knew I was just passing through. And I think Harriet Tubman maintained the mentality that even though she was in bondage, she was not bound. She wasn't bound by the restrictions that were placed on her, and amidst the fear, amidst the sense of I'm certain the sense of worry and agony, she said, this is not who I was destined to be. And freedom is not freedom if I'm only free and my brothers and sisters are not yet free.
Well said. Please.
I think what was important to understand, I agree with everyone said. When I did a lot of research on Harriet Tubman, it just became apparent to me that she could not experience the fullness of freedom, knowing that her husband and her brothers and her other family members were still enslaved, still threatened to be beaten, still threatened to be killed, still threatened to be raped, that there was no way for her to expose, to experience the trueness of just having a good day, knowing that her family was still enslaved, and here I am in the free up north. And that there was something inside, there was a yearning to connect with her family, there was a yearning to connect with others and say, I must go back. There was something that would pull her, that was unstoppable, that pulled her back into that. There's no way that you can just decide, I'm going to go back 6 months. There's something must call you back. There's something deeper and stronger that comes from above that pulls you back into a situation. That's what I submit.
Thank you, Gerald. Why don't we continue on, and I'll ask Mr. Brown to lead us with the next question, which is based on all of those wonderful descriptions that we just heard about Harriet Tubman, what would you say you admire most about her?
I think that there were two things that I admired most about her. And the first was what Dr. Williams articulated earlier, which is courage. I think when you are in a situation or an environment that tells you that you are not valuable, that you're at any moment can be killed and nobody will care, that in fact your life is perilous at any time and any place in a system that devalued not only who you were but who you came from and what you wanted to be. I think having the courage to step out of that, using that North Star to guide her to freedom, first of all, understanding how to make the network connections to get out of slavery herself and get to freedom. And then saying, okay, now that I found a way, let me go back and bring some of my folks with me. And to start to develop, I'm one, I'm teaching one. And spreading that kind of network and association so that you build confidence that there is an alternative to what you've been shown and an alternative to what people are trying to propagate within you. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing for me is that I think she had a spiritual awakening and awareness that was highly sensitive, and that she used that to guide her. She always talked about that North Star, but that North Star was really her spiritual connection to a greater power. And she knew that she had, that was what really allowed her to have the courage to do the things, I think, to move in an area where she was always in danger. So to me, it was the spiritual connection and the courage that made her a formidable person in an environment that said, you cannot be formidable to me.
Okay.
Defiance.
Defiance?
That's what I most admire about her. Her defiance. Well, I mean, there's a lot of things I admire about her. But her defiance is one of them, right? You cannot be afraid to speak out against a status quo that is oppressive. You cannot be afraid to speak out against power, which is a word sometimes we don't like to talk about, but that is implicated throughout the entire history of this nation, right? You can't be afraid to speak out against a power that is not allowing you to be fully yourself and allowing others around you to be fully yourself. So I would say, for me, her defiance is what's both encouraging and admirable, and is something to be modeled from Harriet Tubman. The other thing I really like is her collective effort. I mean, there's something about a woman who goes back to save others. And I think the danger, one of the dangers, is that we only see her as one woman who went back to save others. But Harriet Tubman was a part of a network of people who worked together to save others. And so what is also admirable about what she did was the collective will and spirit and collective ethos and the collective drama that came out of the fact that she's working with others along the way. Right? The station masters, the people who had homes, the people who had resources, food, clothes, wagons, all of these folks she's in dialogue with and working with, even as she as an individual could be the one to get caught, as all the rest of them could, get caught and suffer some tremendous consequences. For her, the consequences were either enslavement and or murder. I mean, I can't say it enough, the brutality and deadliness of a system in which she was operating. It's not like we're now going into the South to save some folks, or we're going into going into the neighborhoods to save some folks, which we don't talk about, I hope, and that we have to do because she's a model for that. But we're not going to get killed just because we want to go save some folks, necessarily so, right? There's complications around everything. But for her to even think about going back south was ultimate danger to her life. But that collective spirit, that collective ethos, that really showed through the decisive measures that she took. This is a woman who's calculating, and that can be a good word in the right situation, right? So her defiance, her collective ethos, and the way that she calculated and planned and organized with others to show that it wasn't just about the individual, but it was about a whole group of people. And furthermore, it wasn't just about a specific group of people, but it was about fighting injustice and inhumanity, period, right? And African Americans were those who were subjugated in the ways in which she saw herself actually enacting against the system to bring about justice.
Thank you. Reverend or Gerald, anything to add? Reverend, speaking of the network that Dr. Williams just talked about, what do you find most intriguing about the Underground Railroad network of people that worked with Harriet Tubman and others to help so many people to become free? Because Dr. Williams is exactly right. For all of her courage and leadership, had she not had that robust network, it would have never happened.
I think that network reflects the best that is in the human spirit. Each of us are inextricably linked. We are connected. Our destinies are tied together. And the understanding of that during the Underground Railroad network period, as it was being built and as they were establishing various locations, for them to understand that inextricable link during a period of time when they were denied education, when they were denied access to opportunities, just shows us that it is something that is kind of a basic need of all of us, that we need to work together. We need to embrace each other's gifts, each other's strengths, each other's skills, and I think that Underground network reflected an understanding of the unique skill sets of individuals all along that path. And if one was more able to provide financial resources, they provided those. If another was able to provide some other type of resource, they provided those. And no one was intimidated because someone else was able to provide something that they were not. They utilized each other to achieve the same goal. And I think that we could learn something from that in modernity if we would work together like that. Each of us has gifts, skills, abilities, and talents. And there's nothing wrong with me depending on you in your strengths to accomplish a goal that I may not have those strengths. My strength may be that I know you who has that strength. And I think that was one of the beauties of the Underground Railroad.
Gerald, you want to?
I think this is important for our young people to hear this part. Great leaders recognize their dependence on others, not their need to depend on someone, not their desire to, but great leaders have to depend on other people. The Underground Railroad network was not just a slave following the North Star. There were stations, and there would be barns that set out. And so when the slaves would get there, usually in 1 to 3 or 3 to 4 slaves, they would get there, and then someone would send word out to the next station that there was at least three or 4 slaves waiting to come aboard. And they would send this, and sometimes the slaves had to act as if they were being owned at certain times when other people came by. It was a very intricate system. There would be times the best time to travel would be in the winter time because there were longer nights and people stayed in their homes during the winter time. So it was a very intricate system. There was a set of code words. And I don't want you to take light of what I'm getting ready to say. I see Harriet Tubman as the old school James Bond. You know, that she was someone that spoke a different language. She was someone that was able to maneuver, and she carried a gun, and she was not afraid to use it. And she sometimes would have to threaten those that she were carrying because they were afraid. There were times when she was with her brothers. They started out on the journey together, and her brother said, "I want to go back." And she had to go back into slavery. So it's something to be understood about this network, and please understand that great leaders recognize that they must depend on others, and that's a part of that network.
Excellent. Any other comments?
I mean, oftentimes she would actually say, no, we are not going back. We can't go back because for one person to go back, it would imperil the entire group. So there are stories, whether they're apocryphal or not, but there are stories where she not only said we're not going back, but she threatened those who she was taking out of slavery with bodily harm if they desired to go back. So, you know, I mean, she was very much focused on here's a particular day we leave. Like you said, she usually left on a Saturday night in the wintertime when the nights were longer, the nights were longer, the days were shorter, when it was very cold, like you said, and really relying on people's goodwill, good spirit, and as you said, moral purpose. Others who had moral purpose. The other thing I would say is that Ohio was directly on that line of the Underground Railroad. Since we're sitting in Ohio, we should recognize Ohio was one of the main places where enslaved people came through to gain their freedom. Some of them ended up here, some of them ended up in Canada. Many of them started in, our stream was from, I'm a historian, you all, so I have some specific notes. But some of them, our stream started in Louisiana, Mississippi, from Georgia, from Arkansas, Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee. That was the stream of enslaved folks who came our way up through Ohio, through Illinois. Some of them ended up in Minnesota, some of them ended up in Wisconsin, and some of them on their way to Canada. And Harriet Tubman herself lived in the States until the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 was passed. And then she said, I can no longer trust this nation with my people. So it was at that point that she began to also ferry people beyond the states, the free states, to Canada. And she herself moved to Canada in the Ontario area. Because with the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, there were paddy rowers out all over the place really trying to capture people and take them back into slavery. Not only were they trying to capture people to take them back into slavery who were enslaved, but many people who were free were actually captured and taken into slavery. And this is not a moment where you have a lot of recourse to begin to argue your freedom unless you had someone to stand up for you who was Caucasian. So, I mean, so there was a lot of dangers that she had to navigate herself as she moved back and forth and as others moved back and forth with her. And I think that's just really important because that also speaks to a kind of flexibility and creative vision that she had too, which I think is very much something that we have to own today and honor today. And our young people really have to figure out what they're going to do with their vision, what they're going to do with their spirit, how they're going to transform that into a mission and a message and a movement for young people around the issues that they want to galvanize around today. And it also means that we have to begin to listen to our young people too, because there was a lot of communication back and forth between Harriet Tubman and those she was ferrying.
That's right.
Right? There's a lot of communication back and forth between her and the networks. Right? There was a lot of communication that was going on. And so we have to open up those corridors too as we begin to figure out when we're going to go back, where we're going to go back, on whose behalf are we going back, for what reason, for what purpose, to implement what at the end of the day in the struggles that we have today.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm always
Hey, that's
back
why
and forth, past and present.
That's why you're here, Professor. That's why you're here. I want to bring us to the 21st century. We've looked back. We've talked about the times that Harriet was with us. But as we think about today, I wanted to ask the question, is education and economic self-sufficiency the new freedom of the 21st century? And if so, are there enough people going back to help those that are still enslaved?
Well,
Anyone on the panel that wants to speak?
Greg is going to start.
Greg.
thank you, Rhonda. Education and or economic self-sufficiency. Well, I would say that those are two critical elements. And I would say that they're inextricably linked because I don't think, the one thing that always resonated with me as I was conducting research in preparation for the panel was that there wasn't a lot of formal education, but people educated themselves on what they needed to know so that they could surreptitiously do the things they needed to do. So there's formal education and there's informal education. All of it steeps in trying to help us become better people and understand how to operate in our environment. So we need to foster environments that create cultures that talk about both formal and informal education and build on those and not devalue one versus the other. Because I think it takes all of that to really make a whole person. I think our youth development training teaches us that if you're really talking about self-actualization of youth, you really have to work on informal systems while you're developing those formal capacities that they need so that they have the skill set, youth have the skill set to actually do the things they want to do. But I want to kind of transition, because I think everybody here can agree on that the education piece is an important piece, and we need to really figure out what that means. And I don't want to get us into that quagmire, because I think for everybody here, there's a solution to that problem. And, the area I thought was really critical was this economic self-sufficiency piece that you talk about. And we always talk about, I think historically in the African American community, economic self-sufficiency means the ability to work. And I want to talk about a new model in the 21st century, which is based on innovation, creativity, entrepreneurship, and wealth building. And talks about no longer being prepared to work in a job, but being a creator of jobs and creating wealth for other people to be able to work in jobs. And I think that's the hallmark we have to kind of work towards in the 21st century, building upon what's going on today and using education as a platform for that. I strongly feel that. I think the research bears that out. I think as we look at ourselves as a people, the only way we're going to move to the next plateau and really become sufficiently capable of competing in a global marketplace is to adopt strategies that promulgate those kinds of ideas. So for me, as we sit here and talk today, if I looked back at Harriet Tubman, I would see her as an entrepreneur. And I would say that the thing that she did was she figured out how to create a system that moved people from bondage out of bondage. Okay? And we ought to think about how we move people out of economic bondage into economic wealth.
Okay. Well, I want you all to take the gloves off on this one, because some would argue that there's folks that are still running north as opposed to going back. And we know there's a lot of people that are waiting on people to come back. So what do you say to that? Reverend Davidson?
I think as the Christian preacher on the panel, I think in looking at the data, the African American church in the United States of America would be 16th wealthiest country in the world. The amount of dollars that funnel into the African American church Sunday after Sunday, day after day, would be enough to begin the process of creating jobs, of empowering people in the community educationally, not just African Americans, but all people. And I think it's incumbent upon us to take personal responsibility for creating programs, opportunities that help people not only develop skills, but help them to develop those creative and innovative ideas and initiatives that can create long-standing wealth. That's one of the areas of deficiency that we have is in creating long-standing wealth. Shaquille O'Neal said this. He said, "I'm rich. Rich goes away." He said, "But Bill Gates is wealthy." And what we have to do is begin to create models in our churches, in our communities, that empower people to utilize the skills, the ideas, the initiative that they have, because there are some people on our streets who would be some of the brightest legal minds, but we've got to go back and get them. There are people who are on drugs now who may be able to find the cure for cancer. But if we don't go back and get them and take responsibility for helping to educate them and empowering them to be creative and innovative, then that's on us. That's our responsibility. And I personally believe that it's incumbent upon the Christian community to go back and do that. As a Christian, when I hear the mantra that I think we should be guided by is, we are called to bring good news to the poor, to help the blind see, to set the captive free, and to set at liberty them that are bound. What is good news to the poor? That there's an innovative and creative way for you to no longer be poor. And that's one of the things that I think we have to do in the 21st century model of going back. We got to go back to Collinwood and Glenville and John Adams and John F. We got to go back and make sure that our young people know the story. But not only do they need to know the story, they need to know how to continue to build the story so that they create their own story.
Thank you. And Gerald, you work with young people. you work with adults, helping them to find jobs and find their way every day. Anything to add?
Well, I think, you know, when I think about this, that education and self-sufficiency it's not a new freedom. It has always been a freedom. There's always been a freedom. It's whether we will actually take advantage of it. When you have to learn, when our folks go to school, our young people go to school, do we teach them how to leverage their education? Do we just send them to school, or do we make sure that they do internships? Do we make sure that they get to know their professors? Do we make sure that when they have an artistic ability, they learn to connect with other artists in the community? When they have these self-sufficiency models, these wealth models, who are they connecting with? So it's not enough to have the model. It's not enough to have the education. We must challenge ourselves to think, how are we going to leverage this? How are we going to utilize this? So education and self-sufficiency has always been a freedom for whomever decides to take advantage of it. Black, white, male, or female. It is your opportunity and it is your avenue to reach a new level. Professor?
Yes. We can be provocative here, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
We're at the City Club.
We're at the City Club. We're going to be provocative. Okay. Dare I say, Harriet Tubman, one of the things I said I really admired about her was her defiance and her courage, and the fact that she had a collective ethos. So dare I propose that she was anti-status quo in a way, and anti-property in a way, and anti-commodity in a way, where she believed beyond skills, and she believed beyond riches, and she believed beyond wealth to human dignity. And that it was the human dignity and the respect and the totality and fullness of being able to live one's life with all of that fullness that was at the center of what she saw was going to move society forward, right? So that I say that to say that we may need to be thinking about other economic models that would actually move us beyond the idea of what is rich and move us beyond the idea of what is wealth to get us to think about what is economically just and how people can benefit from the products of their labor, how they can use culture and innovation and creativity to actually create economic systems and dynamics that actually would benefit everyone, that's not just focused on gaining money, that's not just focused on the individual I and me, which is the kind of society that we often find ourselves in right now. How can I make some money? How can I make my business work? How can I move beyond rich to wealth so that I have it long term like Bill Gates? But what does that mean for the totality of people who are still living in poverty? Right? So how do we begin to think about economic models that get us to those places, right? The kind of places that Harriet Tubman was trying to move us beyond in a system that actually owned people as property, that actually saw and put at the forefront profit and wealth as demotivating force. That's not to say we got to be poor. That doesn't mean all of us got to be poor, right? Doesn't mean all of us can't have a savings account. Doesn't mean we can't have a quality life and live comfortably, however, whatever that means to you. What does that mean in the collective totality of experiences when we're talking about economics? So, you know, is the capitalist space that we're in, I'm going to be provocative, is the capitalist space that we're in, a neoliberal capitalist space that we're in that's hardcore, pure market driven, is that the place that we need to be in? Or what else do we need to be thinking about doing in the Harriet Tubman model that is not only escaping? See, she wasn't just escaping. She was moving through a certain social, political, economic, and historical context that she was operating within. She wasn't escaping. She was trying to dismantle a system that oppressed people. So what does that look like for us now if we're trying to build a social, political, cultural, economic system that does not oppress people, that brings about justice, and spreads the wealth in a way that has a different distribution? I don't know. I don't have the answer to it.
Well.
But I think, I mean, you know, I really do have some answers in the background, but
All right, well.
if we can have the collective wisdom to think about that, right? Like, what does that mean to get outside of that box, right?
Sure. Well, today at the City Club of Cleveland, we're listening to a special program featuring a panel discussion discussing the leadership and legacy of Harriet Tubman. We will return to our speakers momentarily for the traditional City Club questions and answers. So please formulate your questions now, and remember when the microphone is passed to be brief and to the point. We'd like to welcome guests today at tables hosted by the Boys and Girls Club of Cleveland, Lutheran Metropolitan Ministries, Medical Mutual, PolicyBridge, RPM International, and the Word Church. We thank you all for your support. Now we'd like to return to our speakers for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests. Holding the microphone today is Program Director Carrie Miller. Carrie, first question, please.
Good afternoon. I wanted to ask a provocative question myself, and since we're at the City Club and Randy said it was okay, I thought I would do that.
Uh-oh.
I have encountered a quote, and that's not the exact quote that Harriet Tubman once said, or is believed to have said, that she would have freed more if they knew they were slaves, right? And then Dr. Williams, you talked about the Fugitive Slave Act and the frustration that Harriet Tubman felt where she herself had to move people to Canada, and she herself moved to Canada. And so the question is, when we start talking about the 21st century and the new slavery, talk about some of the frustrations that exist. I mean, how can we help people, help the masses, if the masses don't want to be helped? When you described, historically, Harriet Tubman had to threaten people, and she had to really exert her will in order to move people to do the right thing. How do we do that today? Can you talk a little bit about that? Anyone on the panel, not just Dr. Williams, but anybody on the panel.
Greg?
Yeah.
I got something to say.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I know you do.
We'll start with Greg.
Yeah, Ron. I think the frustration is, first of all, that there are classes within our own socioeconomic structure that undermine our ability to be connected. So we have an educated class, a professional class. We have people who see themselves as disconnected. We have other people who are just kind of aimlessly kind of working through the system and are not knowledgeable about what's going on. And I think we don't do a good job of kind of building a language or a communication pathway that allows us to sit down and have real honest conversations about how we make that happen. I think the other thing too is that, and I'm going off script here a little bit, is that I also think that some of us feel like because we made it, we're elites now and we don't have to be bothered. And we don't really want to look back because we're afraid we'll slide back. And unfortunately, that propagates, in my opinion, that whole idea of separate but not equal. And it reinforces the fact that I'm better than or I'm different from you, and that makes me better than you. So I think we got to do some introspective thinking about who we are as a collective and start to have dialogue and real honest dialogue about what do we want to achieve and how do we want to achieve it. And I think we have to spend time educating each other. It can't be a one-way kind of conversation because I have these degrees and I'm in this position. I'm going to tell you. I go to meetings all the time and I sit in rooms with professionals, and the first thing they want to do is go into communities and tell the people that live there how they ought to be living. And the first thing I say back to them is, how would you like somebody to come into your community and do that to you? If you wouldn't like it, why would you think somebody else would? So I think, we have to start to be honest about what happens out here in terms of expectations, in terms of what we're really trying to accomplish. Who are we trying to accomplish it for? And at the end of the day, I think if you can be more transparent and be more honest, you can at least start to have an honest dialogue, and that'll put you on the path towards something different. But I just, today, I think we're all still slaves, because whether it's the current economic system or the one that you would talk about, I think anytime you talk about a systemic approach to anything, there are trappings that go with that. And we have to be aware of those trappings, or we become slaves to that. And that organizational structure then drives what happens, as opposed to the people in it driving what happens. So I'll leave it at that. I could go on for a lot more.
Well, seeing that, well, yes, give him a round of applause. I just wanted to interject as Greg's boss. I never knew you felt that way, Greg.
Do I need to leave?
We're going to take another question.
Good evening. I think many of you mentioned, or at least alluded to, visioning. I know specifically, and I'm probably going to use this, Reverend, I promise. So even though I was in prison, I never decorated myself. I think that really does speak to visioning, something outside of your certain circumstance. So what I would ask is that you all speak to the young people in the room specifically about that. I am one that stands on what is your vision, or having the ability to envision something different than what your current circumstance is. So if you guys can kind of speak to that a little bit more, and maybe even what type of things are in our young people's way, so they're not able to see differently, see a different circumstance, a different life, to be able to understand what wealth is versus riches, understand what hard work and commitment does versus something that's quick and fast, and kind of talk to that a little bit.
Please, Gerald.
I like to start, and this will be addressed to all, but in particular the youth. One thing, when we look at Harriet and what she went through, that it is an absolute guarantee that from this day until the day you leave this earth, you will have challenges. You will have barriers. You will have things that be in your way every single day, no matter whether it's economic, whether it's emotional, whatever it is, you will absolutely have hurdles. The barriers that Harriet had with her was the United States government, was the United States of the Confederacy. We look at what was going on in the Fugitive Slave Act in 1850. When you look at that, you have to understand what took place. There was a huge shift in the country, especially in the North, when that Fugitive Slave Act came out, because now they couldn't just hide the slaves, that if you hid slaves, you could now go to jail yourself. And so then there became some people who were abolitionists, they began to step back and would no longer be a part of that process. And so what I want to tell you this evening, young people, is that you will absolutely have challenges. What will you do with the challenges? We talked about great leaders. Great leaders don't require titles. Although Harriet had several titles. She was called Moses, she was called General Moses. But I want you to understand something, that what you're going to do is how you're going to overcome those, how you're going to go beyond the challenges that you face. People follow people who have great vision and who are passionate about the vision, who are passionate about that journey. There's no way that you can threaten someone's life and not see the passion in their eyes and tell them that you're not going back into slavery. And so you have to look at yourself. What are you passionate about? What are you naturally, instinctively good at in your life? And what are you willing to fight? And what are you willing to die for? And these days and times, we have to understand this. There were a lot of people back then who weren't willing to die. There are a lot of people who weren't willing to fight. So there was something about Harriet Tubman she was extraordinary. She was an extraordinary human being. And you only get people like that every now and again. Sometimes it skips generations. She went beyond what was needed. She went beyond what was required. And she fought every single adversity up until she left this earth. Right? And I want to say this very in particular. She said she had a parcel of land, and she set it aside for the elderly. And then they made a requirement that the elderly would get a chance to, if they wanted to utilize this place to age out gracefully, it would require $100. And so Harriet changed the rules again. She said the requirement for being in this place, you don't need any money at all. And so what happens is that, will you be willing to challenge authority? Will you be willing to rebel? Not for challenging's sake and not for rebellion's sake. What is it that is inspiring you to challenge authority? So I hope that speaks to it.
Well said. Reverend, because you brought that quote forth, anything you'd like to add, Reverend Davidson?
Well, first let me say, when I speak of wealth, I mean that in a holistic sense. I'm not talking about fiscal wealth, because the word salvation means to be made whole. But as it relates to some of the barriers that we face and that young people face currently, we have a culture that currently objectifies women, glorifies violence. The emblems of success that they see are no longer Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Robert King, whoever you name it. That's not who we see anymore. The emblems of success are your rappers, your athletes, and your entertainers. which make up a significantly small portion of who is successful. And I think we could debate whether or not they are successful. I would say no. But that's what's glorified. And one of the most significant influences in the culture is music. And over the last 40 years, music has changed from an empowering, loving kind of, self-determination, let's stay together, let's grow together, I love you, to this strip club, money throwing in the, and that's what we're competing against. What we're competing against is this idea that you can get something for nothing, that you can work as little as possible and achieve as much as you want without putting in any effort. And we don't see any more models of African-American families on television, on the air, that are like the Cosby Show that ran for such a long. But yeah, you have professionals who love their children, two-parent home. Those are just not models that our children see. And so we have to be those models. We have to go back. We can't be intimidated by our own communities. There are some places that some of us in this room will never go. Some of us won't ride down certain streets. And we have to not be intimidated about doing that, because if we're going not just to speak to someone, but to engage in dialogue about what are the needs that you see that will help us to be creative and innovative. And I would also encourage young people to know that environment is not an excuse for mediocrity. That where you are is never, does not have power over you unless you give it power over you. And I think, we've allowed our brothers and sisters who are impoverished, whether it's academically, socially, economically, we've allowed them to decorate their cell. You iPhones, satellite television, and you don't have a home. You don't own a home. I think one of the colossal sins is to drive a Mercedes-Benz to an apartment complex. You don't own your home, but you're driving a Mercedes. You have a Mercedes. And I use Mercedes. I don't begrudge anybody who drives a Mercedes. That's not what I'm saying. But to not own property, but to have all of the trappings that say I'm successful, but you don't own property. You don't even have an education. You don't value education. I think is just the wrong message that we've been sending, and we have to reclaim that and teach self-determination, discipline. And those are the things that I think Dr. Williams kind of brought out initially about Harriet Tubman that I would share with young people today.
Well, we unfortunately are running short on time, as great City Club forums always do. Before we wrap up, I do want to ask you all to offer just 30-second closing comments. But yeah, I know.
Wait a minute. You just gave them like.
I know that's. I have a history professor and a Baptist preacher, and I'm saying 30 seconds. I know that's dangerous.
Okay,
but I did want to, as you frame your thoughts, I did want to let the audience know that there was a lot of thought that went into the panelists, because as you think about change in America, and if you particularly think about the civil rights movement, I think the people on the panel represent what worked. So when you think about what Gerald represents, it's young professionals. It's institutions like the Urban League. We all know what young people meant to the civil rights movement. When we think about the pastor, we all know what the role was of the black church in movements like the civil rights movement. And hopefully a lot more of those kinds of actions will take place today. Obviously, Greg, Executive Director of PolicyBridge, we all know the importance of public policy and the fact that policy can help or hinder all of us to enjoy a certain quality of life and to move upward versus downward. And obviously, Dr. Williams heading up this institute, Social Justice Institute. It's all about fighting for social justice, as well as the role that academia can play, helping to solve problems, but also helping to empower people to prepare themselves for productive lives. So with that, any closing comments, and whoever wants to go first? We won't make our dear history professor go first, since she went first at the very beginning. But anyone else? Closing comments.
Well, I mean, I would jump in.
Oh, please.
I would jump in and say, and piggybacking off of what everyone has said, just a few quick things. One is we need to be aware of social hierarchy in our own communities and middle class bias and how we think about people who do not have what we have. That takes us to thinking about unlocking our own logics and how we make sense of who is worthy and who is not worthy. That helps us to think about who we listen to and who we don't listen to, so that there are many people on the ground in communities struggling right now who are active right now trying to do the work. But we don't see them because we're not in those communities, or sometimes we don't think their voices are worthy to be heard. So I think that's the other thing that we need to think about. We need to think about the psychological power that we have by unlocking educational in a formal and an informal way and actually valuing that. And I think this is where young people and all of us come in. We need to be informed rebels, right? We need to be able to marshal the statistics, the knowledge, the wisdom from wherever it comes to actually transform for the collective the conditions that we face. And I think that's extremely important. We need informed rebels, and we need to listen to young people. We're running out of time, but what I was going to ask was, we got young people in the room. I wanted to hear from the young people. What is it they feel they're facing? What is the issue, the pressing issue of the day for them? We've got to listen to them, so maybe I can talk to some of them afterwards, but we've got to listen to them. And we've got to listen to people who we don't value, the people who we don't think are worthy, returning citizens, people who are incarcerated, mothers on welfare, people who live in public housing. All these people have voices and opinions, and they are fighting for justice as well. And so we cannot just put them in a box, in a place, and say they aren't doing something. They don't want to be moved. They want to be moved. They want us to move with them, and they want us to move in a collective, economically just way. That's not to romanticize. That's not to say all of us are in a struggle, because if all of us were in a struggle, we wouldn't be where we are. But that's what we need to work towards.
Well said.
I'll cede my time to Dr. Williams since she was long-winded.
Yeah. You want to cede your time, so let me finish my Here we go.
I ceded it.
Harriet Tubman says, William Still said about Harriet Tubman, let me just read you this quote. He said about Harriet Tubman, as a woman of no pretensions. Harriet Tubman was a woman of no pretensions. Indeed, she was a more ordinary specimen of humanity who could hardly be found among the most unfortunate-looking farmhands of the South. In other words, she is all of us every day, everywhere. Yet in point of courage, shrewdness, and disinterested exertions, it wasn't about her. She went to rescue her fellow man and fellow woman, so therefore she was without equal. And all of us can be her equal if we just struggle in the same way.
Reverend Davidson.
I would just encourage you to know that whatever it is that you want to accomplish or do, regardless of your age, it is your dream. There was a little fellow who went to sleep one night, and he had a dream. And in the dream, he just envisioned these beautiful, he was in a field, a meadow, beautiful lilies and lilacs and roses. And all of a sudden, a lion comes out of nowhere, and the lion is foaming at the mouth. He's hungry. He sees the little boy, and he begins to jump at the little boy. And the little boy looks at him, and he says, "Lion, are you going to eat me?" And the lion said, "I don't know, homeboy. This is your dream." And that's what I leave with all of you today. It's your dream. Eyes have not seen, ears have not heard, neither has it entered into the hearts of men what God has in store for any of us. Always remember, it is your dream.
All right. Mr. Ford, you have the last word.
I think, I'm sorry, I think it is very important for us to understand that you have to understand, I used to be a third shift worker, and Harriet was a third shift worker. When she was a slave, her job was to stay awake all night to make sure that the baby didn't cry awake. And if the baby did awake or cry, she was beaten. And so think about those who beat her, that they had no idea that one day she would free as many slaves as she did. So the point I'm trying to make is this, that you cannot look at someone in their present condition and count them out.
That's right.
You cannot look at someone in their present condition and say, this is the sum total of you. And so there's a poem, because I know this is a speaking group right here, that I used to perform in high school. And this, what I would say, this is the poem from Harriet to those who beat her. I've been scarred and I've been battered. My hopes the wind done scattered. The snow has frizzed me, and the sun has baked me. Looks like between them both, they don't try to make me. Stop laughing, stop loving, stop living. But I don't care, because I'm still here. That's it.
Ladies and gentlemen, today at the City Club, we have been listening to a special Black History program featuring Dr. Rhonda Williams, Reverend Dr. Todd C. Davidson, Gregory Brown, and Gerald Ford.